Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Ari, and today we're going to have some more stories about our toxic life. But before we start, it would be so much appreciated if you would subscribe to my channel, like the video, if you enjoy it, and maybe leave a comment down below. These simple clicks would mean a lot to the future of this channel and really reward the effort that I put in every day. And now without further ado, let's go. Today's first story. In this story, OP and her wife, introduced by their mothers, built a life in a suburban dream. However, revelations of infidelity shattered their marriage. Discovering his wife's affair through suspicious internet searches and a second phone, the user publicly exposed the affair at a neighborhood party, leading to a divorce. They moved away, prioritizing a fresh start for themselves and their children. Now let's get into the story. My wife and I have been together for almost 15 years. We were actually introduced through our mothers because they were very good friends. The more they would talk to each other about us, the more they realized that we would be perfect together. They shocked both of us with a surprise blind date, where they invited us over and left us completely alone. It was very obvious what they were doing, but neither of us really cared because we did have a connection. We ended up deciding to go on a real date together to see what might come of our relationship. 2 years later, we're getting married and planning our family. About 3 years ago, we decided that we wanted to stop renting our home and move into a nice little house in the suburbs. We searched for houses, and we finally found one that was perfect for what we wanted. It was in a good school district, it had plenty of rooms, and it was close to my work. When we moved, everybody in the neighborhood was very inviting. It was almost like something out of a television show from the 80s. People came over and introduced themselves to us, bringing us little welcome baskets, inviting us over for dinner parties to get to know us better, etc. It was everything we wanted in our suburban dream. My wife started getting very involved in some community event planning. She was doing it mostly to make friends. Every time she would come back from a meeting, she would immediately tell me about all of the crazy things the other women on the committee were saying. Our little suburban community seemed innocent at first, but behind closed doors, things were not what they seemed. She would tell me about people who were having affairs, people who were getting divorced, people who were swinging, etc. There was a lot going on. My wife and I promised each other that we would never end up like any of those people. I kept my promise, but she decided she didn't want to. There was one man who lived down the street from us who had always somewhat rubbed me the wrong way. He was married and he had 2 children, but that didn't stop him from flirting with all of the other women on the block. It sounds bad to say this, but they really liked his attention. He was a good-looking guy. He was younger than a lot of the other men on the block, and he had a very charming personality. I could see why the women were swooning over him. I had spoken to him a few times, but we weren't close by any means, so I was surprised to come home from work one day to find him in my kitchen. My wife was talking to him and drinking a cup of tea. Right away, I was a little uneasy about him being there. I knew how he was with the other married women on the block, and my suspicions were raised. From the way my wife acted when I walked in, it seemed like they were just chatting and having a cup of tea. When he left, I asked my wife about why he was there, and she said that he stopped by to see if he could borrow some lawn shears, and they just started chatting. I told my wife that I wasn't comfortable with her having him in the house without me present, and she agreed not to have him over again. Months passed, and I had forgotten all about the incident. It didn't seem like he was coming back over to the house, and my wife never really mentioned him. My job has some pretty demanding hours. I'm the head of my department, and I can sometimes get caught up in the process, called in for double shifts, night shifts, etc. I tried to do as much of my work for home as possible because of that. So we have 2 computers in the house, my work laptop and the family computer. One night around 11 p.m., I got a call from work asking me to review something that was going wrong. I typically will look at it remotely before I go into the office to see if there's anything I can troubleshoot from home. I forgot my laptop at work, so I hopped onto the family computer to log in. Our children were young at the time, and most of what they looked up on the internet tended to be funny videos online and games to play with their friends. We had a lot of safety blockers on the computer as well. I was surprised to see that those safety blockers were disabled. I thought that maybe my wife might have done that to look something up and forgotten to turn them back on. We had a long talk before getting the computer about internet safety, and I was annoyed that she had been careless with it. I reminded myself to tell her about it the following day and just go about my work. I logged in, did what I had to do remotely, and solved the problem. When I went to remove my work information from the internet history, I saw something that caught my eye. How to hide an affair was recently searched with several articles on the same subject. I knew right away that the only person in the house who could have Googled something like that was my wife, but I didn't know why she was looking it up. Yes, I worked a lot, but when I was home, nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. The more I looked through the search history, I saw more alarming searches. She had been looking for apps to try and hide text messages, cheap prepaid phones, and affordable injury. It was just a lot of red flags. On top of that, it was on our family computer, where our children could have stumbled upon that search history. My wife was sound asleep when I got back to our bedroom, so I grabbed her phone and decided to see if she had put any of the advice in the articles to good use. I didn't see any of the apps that had been referenced in the articles, and I didn't see any text messages that were confirming anything. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I called out of work the next day, and when the kids were outside, I sat my wife down to have a conversation. I told her about what I found, and she immediately shut down any suspicion I had that she was cheating. She told me that one of the other wives on the block had been talking to her about her own cheating suspicions. My wife said that she hopped onto the computer to search for ways that they might be able to confirm if he was or not. In hindsight, I might have believed it so easily because I didn't want to think that my wife was the one cheating. But looking back now, I realized that if something like that had actually happened, my wife would have come to me and told me all of it. I told her I understood, and I apologized for being so paranoid about it. We didn't talk about it for a couple of weeks. I had almost forgotten all about it, but then I found my wife's second phone. I was digging through her purse looking for some mints, and I found a chintzy plastic phone that I knew nothing about. I turned it on and found everything I had been looking for on her other phone. There were hundreds of text messages between her and an unsaved number. It was the only number being contacted on the phone at all. On top of that, there were some pictures being sent and received. It was very discreet. They didn't use any names for the most part, and there were no pictures showing their faces. I found one slip-up that clued me into who it was. The man messaged my wife and told her that Veronica was going to her sister's for the weekend. He then suggested that she could sneak in through the back door, and they could be together however many times they wanted that weekend. I heard the name Veronica countless times from my wife. She was one of the other women that planned a lot of community events with her. My wife hated her. She would always complain to me about how uppity she was and how she made everybody else feel like they were lesser than her. I knew then that her feelings toward Veronica were because she saw her as competition for the man she was sleeping with. I also knew that Veronica was married to the man I found in my kitchen that day. I had forgotten all about that incident, and now I couldn't help but think that something else had been going on when I walked in. I was heartbroken and angry about everything. My wife had lied to me and hidden an affair for me. I had even asked her at one point about cheating, and she lied directly to my face. They were having an affair and sleeping with each other in the homes of their respective families. It was disrespectful and completely disgusting. I knew I was going to divorce my wife, but I wanted to do something else. I wanted to do something to get back at her. During the summer, our neighborhood planned a lot of parties and get-togethers. Memorial Day was coming up, and I knew that there would be a large party with fireworks and everything. I knew it would be a perfect time to publicly embarrass both her and the man she was sleeping with in front of everyone. They would be the talk of the town after I was done with them. The evening of the party came, and everybody was gathered around having a good time. My wife was with her group of friends, and I saw the man she was sleeping with talking to another husband. I walked around and mingled with some people, catching up with them at first. Whenever they asked me about what I'd been up to, I told them that I was filing for divorce. They were shocked, and they would tell me that they had no idea we were having problems. Then I would tell them that my wife didn't even know about them. I would explain that she was having an affair, and I would tell them everything that I knew. I watched as the rumor mill started working. The news was spreading through the party like wildfire. My wife was getting a lot of weird looks, and I could tell that she was catching on to something going on. She walked over to me in the middle of the party and asked me about it. She thought that she was having some kind of wardrobe malfunction, or maybe said something to upset someone. I couldn't help but laugh at how blind she was to the truth. I told her that I was filing for divorce that following Tuesday because I found out about her affair. She tried to cover it up and say that there was nothing to find out about, but then I told her I found her phone. She was silent after that. While we were talking, word was still being spread throughout the neighborhood. I watched as Veronica walked over to her husband and slapped him across the face. He didn't know why she did that, but she yelled at him that their relationship was over in front of everyone. Then she walked over to my wife. I could see the anger in her eyes as she approached. Part of me was kind of worried that they would get into an actual fight. I worried there could be some way I might be implicated in it because I started it by telling everyone about the affair. Veronica pointed her finger in my wife's face and called her every name in the book. My wife was ghostly pale as she said everything. My wife ended up running back to our house in tears. One of our neighbors approached me and offered to have our kids over for a sleepover, and I thanked them for their help. Their kids were good friends with ours anyway. I went home and my wife instantly tried to explain what happened. She tried to make it seem like I was never there for her when she needed me, but that was bogus. Eventually, I got the truth out of her. She had been talking to one of her friends who was having an affair, and they recommended it to her and everyone else. Her friends said she felt younger and desired, and it boosted her confidence. All of that seemed very enticing to my wife, so when the neighbor down the street showed interest in her, she reciprocated. I was disgusted by the answer. I just can't help but think that if she was having issues with her confidence or feeling desired, she could have come to me. We could have talked about it, and I could have done something to make her feel that way. But instead, she decided to throw away 15 years of a relationship. I ended up divorcing her, and with all of the evidence that I collected, she was awarded nothing in the divorce. I didn't want anything to do with the house she cheated on me in, so I ended up selling it. I took the money from that, and I bought a new house in a new neighborhood away from the snakes that encouraged my wife to cheat. Now I'm just trying to get into a new rhythm with my life and my children and find happiness after all of this. Today's second story. In this story, Opie recounts his turbulent 3-year marriage to his ex-wife, plagued by her anger issues and infidelity. Despite her efforts to improve through therapy, he discovers her cheating with an intern through a hidden camera. In retaliation, he sends the footage to her workplace, leading to her dismissal. They divorce, and he finds peace, realizing he's better off without her. He learns not to try to save people who won't change. Now let's get into the story. I, 32 male, was married to my ex-wife, 29 female, for 3 years. We were madly in love, but unfortunately, our marriage couldn't work because of her infidelity. The first time my ex-wife and I met was on a dating site. As of that time, I was desperately looking for someone to settle down with because I was tired of being lonely, and she came around at the right time. So after meeting each other physically for the first time, we had more dates, and as we got to know ourselves better, we fell deeply in love. Our relationship started as a very beautiful one. We used to hang out every weekend, spend quality time with each other, and do fun stuff together. But after about a year of dating my wife, I noticed she had anger issues. At first, her anger issues started as nagging and making mountains out of molehills. Then it got so bad that she would break stuff whenever she was angry. Then once she became calm again, she would apologize and cry for forgiveness. When I noticed this bad attribute, I wanted to break up with her, but each time she begged me, I would forgive her only for the same thing to repeat itself. There was even a time I was so close to breaking up with her because she had an altercation with my mom one time. She came to visit me, but because she had enrolled for anger management classes and I saw a bit of improvement, I forgave her. All this while, I didn't know I was shooting myself in the leg, and marrying her was one of my mistakes. When most people tell stories of how they enjoyed the first years of their marriage, I can't relate to that because the first 2 years of my marriage were filled with fights and arguments. My wife had multiple personalities. One day, she would be all loving and lovely. The next day, she would be so angry over little things she shouldn't be angry about. Aside from the anger issues my wife had, she was a sweet and hardworking wife. She took care of me and my needs and the house too. She also worked for a big organization in the town we lived in. So in terms of finances, she was earning more. Despite earning more, we split the bills equally, and we both took care of our responsibilities. I think I kept holding on to my wife and believed she would change because she was putting in a lot of effort to be a better person, and I wanted to support her. I also knew she grew up in a toxic and abusive environment, and how she was raised contributed greatly to her anger issues. Whenever she did something terrible or broke something, I wanted to leave her, but I couldn't. We had a lot of beautiful memories together, and I didn't want to judge her based on her bad side alone. She also kept telling me that I was the only guy who had stuck with her in both the good and bad times. None of her relationships worked in the past because all the men she dated kept leaving her. I wanted to be the good husband who would stick to his marital relationship with my wife, and I started getting better in the 3rd year of our marriage. Months after our 2nd anniversary, I noticed that the relationship between my wife and I had improved so much. She no longer argued and fought over everything, which was a big step up for us. Initially, I thought that she was getting better at controlling her anger because of the new therapy she was getting. Also, it didn't just stop with the improvement in our communication. My wife began to act like a totally different person. For example, she often complained about work when she returned from the office, but that changed. Instead, she would come home and tell me how she was finally getting along with her colleagues in her organization. Aside from that, she became more cheerful, and everything seemed to change about her. Honestly speaking, all the changes I noticed for months were because of her anger management therapy sessions, and I even went as far as dropping a great review and a 5-star on her therapist's website. It felt so good to have peace in my marriage and hold a conversation for a whole day without ditching plates. Out of happiness, I even told my friends about her improvement, and they were so happy for me. On the other hand, when my wife's anger issues improved, she became so engrossed with work around the same time, which did not allow us to get as close as I wanted. Despite her busy work schedule, I never complained because it was better for her to be calm and engrossed with work than constantly fighting and complaining about work. While I was innocently and wholeheartedly happy for my wife, I didn't know she was doing the unthinkable behind me. The day I found out, I returned home, and my parrot started saying a name I didn't know. Our parrot was good with picking new names or anything that sounded like a name. So when I heard that name, I suspected that someone had visited our house, and he must have heard someone call the name. When I asked my wife about it, she insisted that he must have gotten the name from the television, and that did not sit well with me, mainly because when I tried to argue that my parrot couldn't pick the name, she said that she had been in the house for a long time. Name from a movie. She flipped for the first time in a long while and walked out of me. The moment she walked out of me in anger, I suspected that something was going on. I thought someone must have visited our home, and my wife didn't want me to know about it, so I decided to find out. In the following days, I bought a small-sized camera and hid it in my parents' cage to confirm my suspicion. Then the next day, I told my wife I was traveling to the nearby state to visit my mom, but I was crashing at a friend's house. That same evening, as I stayed in my friend's house to watch my house, I saw something that shattered my heart and destroyed our marriage. I watched as my wife came in with one of her organization's new interns, and they did it on our couch, right in front of the bird and in the camera. Before I found out my wife was cheating on me, I told my friends about my parent and the strange male name it kept saying, but they said I was paranoid. And my parent might have heard the name for a movie, and my wife flipped and walked out of me because I was annoyed. It would be an understatement to say I was disappointed, shattered, and devastated. I could not believe that the same woman I tolerated her anger issues and stood by her on the days I should have been out there breathing fresh air was cheating on me with an intern. It felt like a bad dream I needed to wake up from, but sadly it was my harsh reality. About 2 days after I learned about my wife's infidelity, my broken state turned to anger, and I thought of ways to pay her back. Finally, I had something, and I knew destroying all her years of hard work and commitment to her organization would be a major hit for her. So I sent the video footage to her company, and I was sure they would take action. I returned home a week later because I wanted to cool off and put myself together. When I eventually got home, I met my wife at home. She had been fired by this time, and the intern had been dismissed. When I asked my wife why she wasn't at work, she said her company was downsizing, so they had to let her go. Immediately, she said that I started laughing and told her I knew why she was fired. She was confused and didn't understand what I meant. Before I went home, I had already contacted a divorce lawyer to start processing our divorce, so I told my wife I was behind the video sent to her organization, and at the snap of a finger, she flipped and started yelling at the top of her voice. She said she was glad she cheated on me because I was a weak man, and I didn't satisfy her in bed, so she had to make herself happy. What an excuse. When she said that, my anger level skyrocketed, and before she had the opportunity to start throwing things at me as usual, I pulled her with strength and threw her out of my house. She made a scene outside, and after she was tired of yelling, she took the few things I had thrown out and left. A few days later, she started calling my phone nonstop, and she sent multiple messages saying that she was a changed person and would never cheat on me again. I'd be stupid if I gave her another opportunity. We eventually divorced, and I have been living my best life since then. I never thought I'd say this, but I feel more at peace without my wife. It's almost like I've been let out of an invincible cage, and I feel so relieved. I do not miss my ex-wife, and I'm so glad things turned out that way, or else I might still be stuck in our marriage, hoping that she would evolve into the kind of woman I wanted. One thing I've learned the hard way is to never try and save people like my wife, because you will drown in the process of saving them. As for my precious parrot, I'm glad he helped me get out of that terrible marriage. Now none of my friends doubt my parrot anymore.